Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 23 of The Kill File. I am so glad that you guys are here and ready to hear another fascinating true story. First off, I just want to say that I love the case recommendations, so keep them coming either through our email address at thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com or on the website, thekillfile.com. There is a submission form. Don't forget to check out the merch on the website, which you can find and look through anytime. It might be good for you or somebody else. So today's story is going to be a fun one. It is all about cannibals. So I'm just going to tell you guys what happened. I did the first episode, and I didn't think that it was enough for an entire episode. I dug as much as I could, and I thought, you know what? I'll just put 2 cannibal cases on the same episode, which is kind of new and fun, and why not? As I got into the second one, I thought that my research was coming to an end, and I had my usual, anywhere between 7 and 10 pages or whatever, and I just kept finding information, and I could not leave it out. I ended up doing so much research for this one, and I'm not even going to say sorry. It ended up being 13 pages, but I am a person who needs to know everything about everything. So if I find more details, if I find a backstory, if I find documentaries, whatever, I go for it because I'm not going to leave anything out for you guys. I don't want to do that either. I like to know before, during, and after what happens. So I'm going to share that with you as well. So today's episode is going to cover 2 cannibals. I'm going to start off by saying that the first case, I know exactly how I feel about it. And the second one, I am straight up torn. I lean towards one side now having finished my research, but I am not going to lie, I was back and forth the entire time I was researching the second case. Also, I just have to say that the second case in this episode is by far one of my favorites that I have covered. Purely in fascination, not like in what it would be like to eat someone, because I have absolutely zero desire for that. But the psychology behind a cannibal's way of thinking and behind that desire is just fascinating. I can't wait to share these with you guys. So, both of these particular cannibals are from Germany. Germany, what is going on over there? Give me the tea on why there are so many people eating people over there. Trigger warnings for today will be murder, body mutilation, and cannibalism. Our first story starts with a man named Stefan Trogisch, who worked as a power line technician. He was said to have been on a dating app for the people of the LGBTQIA+ community called Planet Romeo and is said to be used by millions. So there's going to be 2 Stefans in this story. There's going to be Stefan T, who I just introduced you to. He is going to end up being the victim. And then there's going to be Stefan R. Stefan R is going to be the cannibal. It could be Steven. I hope I'm not saying that wrong, but it's spelled Stefan, so I'm going to say Stefan or Stefan. I hope it doesn't get too confusing. I always say their last initial with it, so just keep that in mind. Stefan T, victim. Stefan R, murderer. Okay, so Stefan T's handle on the dating app was CanOpener79, and Stefan R's handle was MasterButcher79. So it's weird that they're both 79. Anyways, they met on the app, and they made a plan to meet up at Stefan R's apartment. The Master Butcher could possibly be a reference to the second case that we're actually going to cover, because that particular person was known as the Master Butcher of Rottenburg. Foreshadowing? Possibly. Now, Stefan R. was a teacher of math and science. I believe it said chemistry at a local secondary school, aka high school, to those of us who live here in America. Stefan R. was said to have grown up in a village in southwest Germany and moved back to Berlin in 2011. Weirdly enough, I could not for the life of me figure out what Stefan R.'s last name was. I was able to find the victim's last name, but not the murderer, which I found to be weird. Is there something in Germany law that protects the suspect's identity? Let me know. Both Stefans had arranged for a quote-unquote safe hookup at Stefan R.'s apartment, which is said to be in the Pankau district. This would be the last time that anyone heard or saw Stefan T. It was mentioned that Stefan T. did not tell his flatmates where he would be going that evening, and actually the last person to have seen him alive was the taxi driver who took him to Stefan R.'s apartment. One source said that after not seeing or hearing from their roommate, the flatmates of Stefan T. would go on to file a missing persons report. Another source said that it was actually Stefan T.'s mother who would be the one to file the missing persons report, so I'm not sure which one is accurate, or maybe it was even both. Fast forward to November, I don't know if I mentioned this happened back, I believe in 2020, of that same year, when a local dog walker, actually it was two of them, would find what they believed to be a human bone, a fleshless femur, in fact, with what was said to be possible bite marks on it. This was located in a forest that is on the northern outskirts of the capital. After the authorities were called, they were able to find many more parts of human remains, which would include a torso. At this point, the authorities were using the canine unit to help them locate the mutilated remains from scent. Forensic testing of the said remains would positively identify those remains as belonging to Stefan Trogisch, sadly. This is when police would announce that what started as a search for a missing person had now turned into a homicide investigation. The canine unit was used to track the victim's scent from the remains, and this was said to include a torso and a thigh at this point. And this is when the canine would track the scent all the way back to Stefan R.'s apartment, which I found absolutely incredible. Can you imagine getting caught? I mean, don't imagine, because we wouldn't do that crime. But can you imagine having done a crime and then getting caught because a dog sniffed you out? Like, man. This is where the authorities would confront Stefan R. about the disappearance and death of Stefan T., to which the murderer would deny any involvement at first. This is where the authorities would find an empty freezer, which was said to contain trace evidence of blood, along with 25 kilograms of sodium hydroxide, which is actually a chemical that is used when people are trying to disintegrate human remains. Also, in the apartment of Stefan R., the authorities would find a butcher's knife, a bone saw, as well as bone fragments. Initially, Stefan R. denied having anything to do with the brutal attack. He actually stated that he found the victim dead on his couch after spending the night together. He stated that he didn't call the authorities and report the death because he was afraid the authorities would learn about his homosexual tendencies. So, let me get this straight. You surf specific sexuality sites, and you find someone that you like for a hookup, and then you supposedly find someone dead on your couch in the morning, and instead of thinking, oh my God, I should call the authorities or an ambulance for this poor man to see if he can be saved or get some help, you're claiming that your thought process was to dismember this man so that no one would find out that you like to have sex with other men? Like, how would that be better? You are a fucking piece of shit either way, and no one gives a shit about who you sleep with. We do, however, care that you murdered a man and dismembered his body. So, here is where we find out that not only did Stefan murder and dismember the other Stefan, but that the police actually came out and said, quote, because of the completely fleshless bone and other evidence, we strongly suspect that Stefan T. was the victim of a cannibal. Come to find out that the murderer, Stefan R., actually consumed the penis and testicles of Stefan T. As they were continuing the investigation, it was reported that Stefan R. had definitely been known to poke around cannibalism websites and chat rooms. It was also stated from the authorities that there seemed to be no indication that this victim had in any way agreed to be killed. Now, this comment intrigued me. I had to find out a little more by what was meant there, and what I found may shock you. So, because of this comment, I had to do a little research into German laws, and I found something interesting. While the law doesn't specifically say that you can give permission for your death and that the killer would go free, there is something of a law called homicide on demand. This is in Section 216 STGB, and this law is in reference to the fact that a person may be asked to be killed, and this would need to be a serious request. Killing on demand is, of course, illegal still, but the punishment, if you can call it that, is a suspended sentence of 6 months to 5 years. Along with this, the act of killing on demand is exempt from a punishment if the circumstances are something like medical-based euthanasia. So I researched this further because now my interest is piqued, and according to a website that I will link in the transcripts called firstthings.com, the writer, I believe is Wesley is his name, says on the website that people in Germany now have the, quote, absolute right to commit suicide and receive assistance in doing so for any reason or no identifiable reason at all, end quote. This website also states that this rule is quote-unquote all-encompassing, that it could even apply to children who are possibly capable of making autonomous decisions. There does seem to be some kind of possible waiting period for minors, etc. However, the German government, quote, may also prohibit particularly dangerous forms of suicide assistance, whatever that means. The German constitution now requires literally death on demand, end quote. I love how the author of this website was like, whatever that means. Like, yeah, what does a dangerous form of suicide assistance entail? This entire law to me begs for confusion on homicide investigations and what is to stop people from being able to lie about the person asking for help. German listeners, if you know more about this or want to add more to this, please email me and share your knowledge. I am generally fascinated. So, Stefan R.'s trial began in August of 2021. Stefan R. was being charged with the murder as well as also being accused of stockpiling that 25 kilograms of the chemical that dissolves human flesh. This is where it would be announced, as mentioned before, that Stefan R. had visited cannibal-related forums and had begun to, quote, develop slaughter and cannibalism ideas. The defense in this trial would argue that, quote, sexual fantasies or butchery fantasies aren't a crime, end quote, which, sure, that may be true, but when you take those fantasies into action, then it very much becomes a crime. He again tried to use the defense and told the court that morning after the men had sexual relations, that he would go on to find Stefan T. dead on his couch, panicked, and decided to quote-unquote dispose of his body. It would then be found out that the killer sedated the victim before he, trigger warning, slit the victim's throat. During the trial, the parents and brother of Stefan were said to be present with the mother of the victim set to take the stand at some point. I can't imagine sitting in the courtroom hearing these things about your child. Jesus. The family's lawyer said, quote, they want to know what happened to their son. They don't expect Stefan R. to justify himself or try to apologize. It is not excusable, end quote. And they are absolutely right. There is no excuse in the world for this. During the trial, the judge spoke to the fact that Stefan R. was very careful in the separation of the testicles from the man's penis as what he described in a cannibalistic ritual. Stefan R. would then proceed to eat his victim's genitals. This trial was said to be one of Germany's most quote-unquote extraordinary trials in its history. Prosecution would argue that Stefan R. is guilty of luring the victim to his apartment, sedating the victim, killing him, and also guilty of dismembering the body and scattering the victim's severed parts around the city of Pankow, Germany. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. It was also said to be that not only did this cannibal use his victim to play out his, quote, sadistic, cannibalistic sexual desires, but that also poor Stefan T. was found to be dead within mere hours of meeting Stefan R. So, a little further to the fact that Stefan R. was on cannibalistic forums and chat rooms, Stefan R. at one point had answered somebody else's question about whether or not it would be possible to live through genital amputation. Stefan would answer, quote, in my experience, some people desired it in order to feel like a woman or to take masochistic pleasure in it, end quote. Boy, have I never been more thankful to never have desires or fantasies about eating people. I am not here to kink shame. You do you, and you play out your fantasies all you want. Except when it comes to cannibalism and or hurting other people without consent. Then we have a problem. But When you break it down on a human level of the fact that kinks are kinks and you like what you like, I am very grateful to not have these type of fantasies. I would imagine it would be all sorts of fucked up in your mind, and yet you yearn for it and derive great pleasure from these fantasies. That must suck, in my opinion. Also, I have so many questions. Where does that fantasy come from? Are you born with them? I know one cannibal in particular that I hope to cover at some point, out of pure fascination, was said to have had fantasies of cannibalism since he was 8 years old. So what the hell does that mean? Is it somewhere in our youths that wires get crossed of sex and death? I am just so fascinated with cannibals, I think, because it's just so different than anything I've ever thought or wanted in my life. This is when the media would dub Stefan R. as the cannibal of Pankow. Judge Mathis Schertz would say to the court what Stefan R. did was quote-unquote inhuman. Following this, Stefan R. would be sentenced to life in prison for his malicious and disturbing acts of murdering and cannibalizing his victim. So the courts did decide that because the crime was particularly serious, this killer will not be eligible for the automatic parole that happens in Germany at the 15-year mark, although that verdict can be appealed. You guys, is that not scary or what? Germany, how do you live there, knowing that this awful man can get out so soon? That scares the piss out of me for you. Even though so many of the reports say that he received life in prison as a sentence, I still have so many questions. First, they don't release the defendant's last name in Germany when someone is a murderer. What is that about? And also, when I was looking for pictures of this man, he had like an aluminum shield over his face during court, and I don't understand that either. I finally found a picture of him, but why wouldn't you want to know what this dirtbag looked like? And why does he get so much anonymity? It is wild to me. Okay, so now we are going to move on to the next case. This one is a little bit more known in the true crime world. This one is also one of Germany's most bizarre cases and made history, it seems, as well. This case actually came before the one that we just spoke about, as this one happened in the early 2000s. We are going to cover the story of Armin Mewis and Bernd Jorgen Armando Brandes. Let's start with Armin Mewis. I am going to try and continue to say his name correctly with the German accent because I'm trying to be respectful. But if I slip and I say Armin, like the British guy on the documentary says, or like we would say here in the US, just know that sometimes when I get on a roll and I read quickly, I fail to realize what mistakes I'm making until I go back and edit. Shout out Ron Burgundy. So, there was a documentary made on this man, which I was so excited to see until I found out that although there was 4 hours of footage from an interview with Armin, it was deemed, quote, too disturbing to show, and so there ended up only being 19 minutes released of that particular documentary. Like, what? I have to know what is on the rest of those tapes. What could possibly be so bad that they won't release it? I'm so intrigued. In one of the documentaries that I was able to find, it says that Armin's behavior as a child was said to be similar to most other children his age. It was said that Armin had a love for animals and thought his country life to be quote-unquote idyllic. One friend named Manfred, who was also from the same neighborhood, remembered that Armin had a pony named Polly. However, Armin would describe an experience he had at the age of 5 to be traumatic. He was said to have watched his father abandon his family. He was outside playing when he heard the front door slam shut, and his father was actually leaving. Despite the fact that Armin tried to stop him, his father would never return. Not long after, his brothers would do the same, which left Armin as quote-unquote the man of the house, whatever that means. Armin's mother was said to be dominant over him. In the documentary I saw, it said that his mother was actually known to hate men. She, in fact, would call him girls' names and force him to take care of her, doing the housework, the shopping, etc. It was also known that during Armin's adolescent years of life, where he lived out in the countryside, he would often witness animal slaughterings, which was said to be something that was quote-unquote normal for him, and he said later became part of his sexual fantasies. He also spoke to the fact that before his brothers had grown and left the home, that Armin found himself lonely and longing to share the love that his brother, whose name was Ingbert, had given him. He wanted that with another person. That's sad. Armin would go on to identify as being bisexual and spoke to the fact that he increasingly found some satisfaction in what he said were zombie movies, particularly interested in scenes where human flesh was being dismembered. All right, that's a choice, but I won't kink shame you. In the documentary, it was said that Armin would spend hours watching butchers preparing and cutting up meat. At the age of 19, Armin, in January of 1981, would join the West German Army. He then became part of what was called the 52nd Armored Infantry Battalion in Rottenburg. It was said that Armin wanted to make a career of being in the military, and he wanted to be a professional soldier. There, he was surrounded by hundreds of young men. He would spend 12 years in the army. These young men would stimulate his mind and fantasies, but he was able to keep those at bay by having a sense of normalcy on the outside. When Armin would hang out with his neighborhood friend Manfred, as they got older, his friend would have a girlfriend, but Armin wouldn't. His friend Manfred would go on to say that while they were in the military together in the barracks, Armin once asked Manfred if he thought he, Armin, might be gay, to which Manfred said that's something that you would need to know for yourself. He would go on to say that he, Manfred, isn't able to look into his friend's soul and see what Armin is attracted to. Manfred then went on to say that he actually always thought that his friend Armin was gay. On the documentary, it would go on to say that he failed in a normal relationship, and then it would turn out that his army career was a bust as well. This is when Armin would find a friend in alcohol. This would lead to Armin wrecking his car not once, but twice drunk driving. He would then leave the army, return home, and was said to look after his quote-unquote aging mother. He would take care of his mother and sought out a new career in being a computer expert and would help to maintain the computers of large banks and similar institutions. After the death of his mother, Armin began what would be deemed as a second life in the world of the internet. You know, the World Wide Web. He would allegedly stumble into chat rooms about cannibalism. It was said on the documentary that just within a few weeks, maybe a month or two, of his mother passing, literally all traces of his mother had been removed from the house to where Armin could then fulfill his obsessions. One expert, David Wilson, who was said to be a leading criminologist professor who had been studying Armin and his cannibalistic ways, said that if you are truly a self-realized cannibal by the age of 12, like Armin, then he must have known that he was a little different and obsessive and quote-unquote unique. The internet coming about the way that it did and when it did helped Armin to realize that there were other people out there like him and that also have the same interests as him. Armin later spoke to the fact that he was interested in the chat rooms that spoke of death and cannibalism. German authorities would later come out and explain that hundreds of users from those chat rooms would meet in these, quote, sadomasochistic and torture forums, but mostly for sexual stimulation and roleplay, end quote. Again, not exactly my bag, but whatever floats your boat. Who the hell am I to judge you? What I found fascinating, and albeit a little weird to me, but that's just my opinion, was the fact that Armin was said to, I guess, design websites and doctor photos to make it look like he had already cannibalized a person. He would take meat and make it look as though it was human meat, and this, of course, was animal meat at the time. It was also said that he would form human bodies from marzipan, and then he would slash them open and make it look very real, which to many looked as though they were incredibly real. On the documentary I was able to watch, a criminal psychologist named Dr. David Holes is asked the question of why is it deemed so taboo for one human to want to eat another human being in so many countries. The psychologist then says this question can be difficult and speaks to the fact that by using the word taboo, of course we mean that, quote, societal pressure to stop you doing something. Clearly, you shouldn't breed with your own family due to problems with genetics. Similarly, it's not an evolutionary interest for us to eat each other. In a majority of cases, often eating other humans will actually produce diseases, particularly the brains, and those diseases presumably are designed to stop us doing it, end quote. I've actually read that somewhere before where eating human flesh can alter your DNA or make you sick or cause problems for you. So that was interesting to me. When asked if cannibalism is common or rare, the doctor then speaks to the fact that in a situation like Armin's, it's more rare. But in situations of war, it is common and quite high. The doctor went on to say, along with the higher cannibalism in war, so is rape. But that they are both often covered up and not even documented and is definitely more common in conflict situations. That blew my mind, right? Holy crap, I didn't know that, did you? You guys, this case turned out to be insane. Let me tell you, we are just getting into it, but the psychology is fascinating. When Armin first posted ads trying to find someone younger, preferably between the ages of 18 and 25, who was handsome, not too muscular, to cannibalize in the chat rooms or on the websites, there were no respondents. However, when Armin raised the specific age to 30, he finally got a hit. This was a man named, I did look these up, so I'm sorry if I butcher them, but I promise you I'm trying. His name was Bjord Bowser, the first person that had contacted Armin with a wish to be slaughtered. However, this seemed to be more of a game to Bjord, and when the time came for it to actually happen, the man said no. After that, Armin was uninterested, as a part of his own fantasy was for him to find a willing participant. In the photos that Armin took of himself, maybe for the ads or whatever, he would take pictures of himself either holding butcher knives, paper mache heads, although the documentary said it like papier mâché, which was so fancy. Armin would also take mannequins and saw off different body parts, and was said to then hang them from the ceiling. It was said that Armin was wanting to show potential willing participants what he was quote-unquote capable of doing. By all accounts of his neighbors, Armin seemed to be the perfect neighbor. He would mow their lawns for them, repaired their vehicles if it was needed, and he would even invite them to dinner at his home. One source went on to say that other residents in his small town of Rottenburg also said that they thought nothing of this 42-year-old man, Armin, who was said to be a computer expert. They said his light would burn later into the night, quote, inside his creaking mansion. To them, I guess he seemed like a normal computer expert who worked late into the evening, as one often does who doesn't have a family or anything to bind them to specific hours. Armin would roleplay with other people in hotel rooms, but no one was actually willing to be cannibalized in reality. This is when Armin would go on to meet his lover and victim named Bernd Jürgen Brandis, aged 43. Armin's handle was said to be Antrophagus, and Brandis's handle was said to be Cater99. So, I know you know this, but I am a curious cat, and I wanted to know what Antrophagus was, or what it meant, because it stood out to me. And while I wasn't able to find that word exactly, I was able to find a movie called Anthropophagus, which I know I'm butchering, I'm so sorry. That movie came out in 1980, and the plot is said to be, quote, a group of friends and a hitchhiker become stranded on a tourist island where they were stalked by a disfigured, cannibalistic killer, end quote. Brandis would reply to an ad that was said to be placed by Armin on the website called The Cannibal Cafe, entitled Dinner, or Your Dinner, where Armin would hope to find a, quote, young, well-built man who wanted to be eaten. With this ad, Armin would be offering someone to possibly fulfill their own fantasies with a chance to be eaten alive. When Brandis would respond to this ad, Armin would find that Brandis would be the one. This would be what Armin would say to be his perfect victim, as Armin was set on the fact that he did not want to cannibalize someone who didn't want that to happen. He did not want to force someone into any situation, and it was actually very important that someone would want this. In fact, we will get into it a little bit later, just how particular Armin was in his choice of Brandis, and how Brandis was not the only candidate that Armin had to choose from. In fact, there were several. So, I did see some conflicting reports on whether it was Armin that set up the ad and Brandis responded to it, or if Brandis had set up an ad and Armin responded to it. It actually seems like it could have been both. One source said that Armin's was entitled What I Said Above, with the dinner, and another source said that Brandis posted an ad that included Brandis's wish for someone to, quote, obliterate his life and leave no trace, end quote. It does seem as though both were actively seeking and posting ads to fulfill their fantasies. So it's not clear exactly how they came to meet, as so many different reports were made on this, but one way or another, Armin and Brandis met. A Frankfurt district attorney named Peter Kohler would later state, quote, I must admit that cannibalism is a new dimension. It is no longer the solemn goal to generate pain, but there is an intention to kill. But we are regarding this as an isolated case, end quote. It was reported that this particular district attorney monitors the violent porn scene in Germany. First off, I think it's safe to say that this is no longer an isolated incident, as this is not as unheard of as you may think. We will later find out. Secondly, I was a little confused as to why a district attorney is the one that's tasked with monitoring the violent porn scene. Like, shouldn't that be someone's whole job in itself? To monitor these sites and ensure that none of them are snuff films in disguise? I can only imagine that that kind of job would be daunting for anyone and could be hard on the psyche for anyone. I know in a lot of videos, the person who is playing the quote-unquote victim gives their full consent on camera before anything happens, which I think is a good practice, of course, to ensure that it isn't being taped as some sort of sexual assault or something. But this will also beg the question later, what happens when someone does give their full consent for cannibalism on video? Bernd Brandis was said to be seen as a, quote, successful, financially secure professional with a live-in girlfriend. This girlfriend of Brandis, named Bettina L., would tell reporters that they had enjoyed a healthy sex life. However, the relationship would come to an end when Brandis would tell Bettina that he was also interested in men. Later on, we find out that he actually was dating somebody else, a man, at the time of the cannibalism. So, I'm going to read to you a little bit of their online communication, just so that you will have an idea of what was really said when we talk about whether or not someone consented to whatever happens that I'm going to tell you, and if Brandis was indeed a consenting party. Okay, this is how the conversation went down. I am going to leave out some of the chit-chat because it's not pertinent to the case, but if you are interested in reading the full transcript, you can. This lovely woman named Gina Moore translated it for us from German, and you can read it on harpers.org website, and of course I will link that in the transcript. These are all direct quotes from that transcription. Armin says, it's only a few days until March 9th. Brandis says, still, I would rather have met you yesterday and felt your teeth. Armin, one can't have everything. There's still some time before you really feel my teeth. Brandis, I hardly know what to expect. Have you slaughtered a man before? Armin, unfortunately only in my dreams, but in my thoughts, I do it every night. Brandis, so I'm the first? You have eaten human flesh before or you haven't? Armin, no, you don't exactly find it in the supermarket, unfortunately. Then they speak a little bit about how blood tastes and Armin's love of blood, to which Brandis says, then I hope you won't wilt, that you can really see it through without a problem. Trigger warning, the next part is a bit much, but I think it's needed to see the level of consent that they are both giving in their fantasy. Armin, to bite into your penis will certainly not be easy. Living flesh is somewhat more resistant than fried, but one thing is certain, our dream will be fulfilled. So again, here they talk about like the texture and the material that makes up the penis, and it's graphic, so we don't need that. But Brandis then says, for both our sakes, I hope that's true. I hope you also already thought about what's to be done with the rest. Fulfilling the dream shouldn't become a nightmare for you. No one will ever know where I've disappeared to. They then go on talking about what they will do with the rest of the remains, like what he plans on keeping or to eat and what he plans to throw away because it is considered what he called, quote, some fleshy trash. Then saying after he is finished, there won't be much of him left. Brandis then speaks to the fact that he is glad Armin has thought about it and that it definitely sounded like he was the first. He also said that Armin would need a really good hiding place for things like his knees. This is when Armin would say that he actually considered catching a young person from the street, but that he would really only rather kill people who actually wanted to be killed. So my point in sharing this part with you guys, and again, if you want all the gory details, you can definitely read it, but I didn't want to disturb anyone. I just wanted you guys to see their own words, especially Brandis's, that he was up for whatever was about to happen and was fully agreeing and giving his consent to this. I didn't get the chance to see this on the conversation text, but I remember hearing this from the story when I first heard it, and it was brought up on the documentary that Brandis had actually suggested that his skull could be used as an ashtray. I'm unsure of what I would want my skull to be used as, but I assure you it would not be an ashtray. But to each their own. In an interview with Armin from prison, he told the reporter that the moment Brandis stepped off the train, Armin was very excited and nervous. When they got back to Armin's home, it was said that Armin went into the kitchen to make them both some coffee, and when he returned to the living room, Brandis was found naked and apparently said, quote, "I want you to admire your dinner." The two men engaged in sexual activity, but that Brandis was dissatisfied. Armin said, quote, he wanted to be eaten alive. This is when the plan would take action. Now, here is where, towards the end of my research, the documentary stated that Brandis would take a half a bottle of cold medicine and told Armin when he gets sleepy, then he could castrate him. This is when Brandis would actually change his mind 30 minutes after he took the cold medicine. As Armin drove Brandis back to Castle, Brandis was fearing returning home and having to explain his actions to his new partner, which actually forced Brandis to change his mind once again. This is when everything from this point on would be recorded on video. As they drove back to Armin's home, Brandis thought that it would be better for him to be completely unconscious, and then they could move forward with their shared fantasy. Brandis would swallow 20 sleeping pills with a half a bottle of schnapps, although one source said it was actually very strong cold medicine. But either way, Brandis would soon be out of it in some capacity. Then the time came for the castration. At first, they tried to use a kitchen knife, and I guess that this was not working for them, so they were able to use a sharper knife. Armin would then remove Brandis's penis, quote, with his agreement. This all took place in what was said to be a killing room of sorts that Armin had set up for the two. After the castration was complete, it was said that both of them wanted to eat the penis. Yeah. So, when they tried, both of them struggled because it was said to be, quote, too chewy. Armin would then fry up the penis for both of the men to eat. However, it was said that Armin thought it would taste better than it actually did. After this, Armin then drew up a bath for Brandis. Apparently, Brandis was slowly dying, but was getting cold. And this is why he would ask Armin to draw him a bath, thinking that the warm water would help to drain the blood quicker and make the process of ending his life faster. Armin proceeded to check on him every 15 minutes, and he was reading a Star Trek novel at the same time outside the door. At one point, Brandis would call out for Armin and had gotten out of the bath and passed out on the bathroom floor. Armin would then pick him up and take him to a bedroom where Brandis then said, quote, "If I'm still alive in the morning, we will feast on my genitalia. Don't dream of calling an ambulance." It was then stated that in the early hours of the next morning that Brandis was dead. However, the question of whether he was really dead or not would come into question during the second trial later on. Apparently, Armin would proceed to stab Brandis in the neck twice, a sort of trigger warning throat slashing as he began the slaughter of meat. Armin then dismembered Brandis into many pieces, as well as putting different parts into his freezer. Armin would then bury the skull of Brandis in his own garden. This made me curious. Why did they just say skull? Was there no longer flesh attached to it? And if not, was he planning on eating the man's face? After this, Armin said that he, quote, decorated the table with nice candles. I took out my best dinner service and fried a piece of rump steak, a piece from his back, made what I call princess potatoes and sprouts. He would later tell an interviewer that he'd sautéed the steak with garlic, nutmeg, salt, and pepper. After I prepared my meal, I ate it. End quote. What? I don't know what it is for me, but the fact that this is something that was so thought out and ritualistic and seemingly almost respectful makes it so much more confusing to me. Like, why? Armin would then further describe the taste of human meat by saying, quote, "The first bite was, of course, very strange. It was a feeling I can't really describe. I had spent over 40 years longing for it, dreaming about it, and now I was getting the feeling that I was actually achieving this perfect inner connection through his flesh. The flesh tastes like pork, but stronger." End quote. Wow. Is this not seemingly like a person who has always wanted to, say, try something like mac and cheese for the first time in their lives? Like, they're so excited for the mac and cheese, for the homemade sauce, the crumbles on top, and just having the time of their lives. But this is with human flesh. I don't know how I feel about this. Disgusted and fascination at the same time. It's very weird. Armin placed pieces in the freezer for future consumption, which was said to have taken place somewhat over the next few weeks. He was said to have thawed out and cooked parts of Brandis with olive oil and garlic. He ended up eating around 20 kilograms of this flesh. For us Americans, this is about 44 pounds of human flesh and meat. Armin stated, quote, "With every bite, my memory of him grew stronger." He would later tell detectives that he would eat Brandis with a bottle of South African red wine. Apparently, he made steaks, meatballs, and tenderized the meat because it was much chewier than he thought, all while videotaping himself cutting the meat. Then he would repeatedly watch his tape to probably relive the moment. I think it was quoted on the documentary that he would masturbate as he watched it as well. By June of the same year, Armin was again looking for another person to cannibalize. He posted pictures of what he and Brandis had accomplished, and it was said on the documentary that this made him some sort of a hero in the cannibal world online. While others only fantasized about cannibalism, Armin had accomplished it. Sharing this with the world would turn out to be his biggest mistake. On July 8, 2002, a 23-year-old medical student named Reinhold saw Armin's ad and was not only shocked, but felt he needed to know more, so he contacted Armin. Reinhold then got enough details from Armin to know there was actually a crime that took place. And of course, he alerted the authorities. December 10th, 2002, the authorities would make a visit to the remote farmhouse due to a tip that they had received from a younger Austrian man who had strong beliefs that whoever lived out there may have killed and then consumed someone. When the police got to the farmhouse, they would then, in Armin's freezer, find what was said to be a false bottom which contained meat. Armin would tell the authorities that it was just wild pig. During that sweep, they took samples of the meat and the farm in different places, and while they waited on the test results, they didn't have enough to hold or charge Armin, so they let him go. It was in the next couple of days that Armin came forward and wanting to figure out the best course of action, so he confessed. The meat was positively identified as human meat, and at this point, the authorities arrested Armin. At the trial, German prosecutors would explain to the court that Armin had actually been fantasizing about killing and eating someone since the age of 8. What is it with the age of 8? That's the same for the other cannibal that I was talking about, which is weird. As the definition of cannibalism is the quote-unquote non-consensual consumption of another human being, it was said that this unprecedented case had initially proved problematic for lawyers because they had discovered that cannibalism was actually not illegal in Germany, as apparently in many other countries. Also, without any kind of motive, the case could prove to be hard to charge Armin. However, Armin did plead guilty at the first trial to the assisted suicide of Bernd Brandes. I wonder if it's now different and maybe there's laws in place for this now. I was curious, but I didn't look it up. I guess during the trial there was a man named Professor Michael Baber, and he was said to be the director of the Institute of Sexology and Sexual Medicine, and he would go on to suggest that Armin displayed what he believed to be, quote, highly specific form of fetishism where his desires for attachment and comfort is achieved by contact to the fetish. In the case of Armin Mavis, the fetish is male flesh from a person that he knows and likes and who voluntarily wants to be eaten by him, end quote. Armin claimed numerous times that Brandes had not only advertised for his own death and consumption, but that this was something that this man had also wanted for a long time, and Armin was just the man who fulfilled it for him. Armin was found to be fit to stand trial, and he would be convicted of manslaughter back in 2004, after which he was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. A price worth paying to have the moment you wanted since you were 8 years old. He would then be retried for murder and disturbing the peace of the dead just 1 year later. Because Brandes volunteered, Armin felt that he did nothing wrong, which was just simply completing a sex act which resulted in death. He then appealed his sentence, and it proved to be a big mistake for Armin. He felt the sentence of 8 years was unjust, while Germany was also upset, feeling like it was time to charge Armin with murder. Here is where I get a little bit torn. I mean, murder is murder. However, if someone is freely volunteering, and not just volunteering, but actually was wanting to be cannibalized and killed in this way, should Armin be charged with murder? Should he still be punished with the full sentence of the law? How do you feel about this? Because I'm a little torn. On the one hand, this man was actively seeking to be cannibalized and wanted to die this way. That much is very apparent. It's not like this was a snap decision from either of them. Not if Brandes had to travel by train to get to Armin and have this done. It doesn't seem like this is just a quick fantasy that he would later on regret. On the other hand, what if this man was just mentally ill? And with some help or medication or something that he wouldn't have wanted this anymore. Do you think that if there was some kind of system where, like, if someone wants to die a certain way and they're checked out by a mental health professional, that they should be allowed to decide when and where they die? Do you believe mankind should be able to choose this? I mean, we do have things like euthanasia where someone is terminally ill and is able to choose their own death over suffering or illness. They get to take some kind of control back in their lives and choose, right? I don't know, it's so all over the place for me. The prosecution stated during the trial that Brandes apparently was suffering from a, quote, severe psychiatric disorder, and then went on to say that he had, quote, strong desires for self-destruction, which was what I was just saying that I was stuck on. If this man truly was mentally ill, is he able to give his full consent? Also, if Germany truly does have a law where someone is seemingly asking to be killed or helped with suicide, and that the sentence is suspended, then maybe Armin was only guilty of that. Why would that not apply here if this man was seeking death in a specific way and Armin provided that for him? Or is it just so wrong because he consumed a freaking human being, which is wrong on so many levels? What do you think? Let me know. Before I talk about the second trial that took place for Armin, I have to throw this out there, that in the research I found that there was a particular article that was speaking to the fact that there was extensive reporting on this case in the media in Germany. I guess newspapers had given intimate details in the account of the killing of Brandes. While there was a lot of controversy on this fact alone, one psychiatrist spoke in particular to the fact that they felt that we as a society have lost the cultural control of what is okay to show on TV and also reported on in the newspaper. Furthermore, he said, quote, the flood of extremes that are being presented these days address our basic instincts and can trigger new fantasies, end quote. I found that quote so interesting. There is one more quote from this particular psychologist that I'm going to tell you, but I found his thoughts on this fascinating. He is, in some extent, saying that the things that people are seeing on TV and in the media could trigger new fantasies for people, which is also kind of going back to when people, even here in the US, have been blamed, like violent movies or violent music, on why young people commit the crimes they do. There are definitely two sides to that coin, and probably some people in the middle like me. I don't know if these things can cause behavior because I'm not a trained mental health specialist, but I can say that when I was younger, I was just like, oh my God, quit blaming music for people being pieces of shit. People do what people do regardless of what they hear or see. And while I still feel that way for sure, I also, in my adult years, can kind of understand that if you're listening to the same songs over and over about homicide or how it feels like a release when you shoot someone, or my personal favorite, drag your ex-wife from the trunk of your car, if you catch my drift. While again, I don't think that we can blame these things, there could be something to it adding to people's mental illness and causing things to feel more normal in their minds. Maybe instead of feeling isolated with these thoughts, it could put a person into the headspace that it's okay to do certain things because other people feel the same way and want to do the same things. I don't know, I'm probably just talking out of my ass, but even the artist that I love, from which I just hinted at his song about his ex-wife, came out with a song about someone who committed suicide and killed their pregnant girlfriend, and got the idea from the lyrics of a song of his, where at the end he's like, oh shit, I was just saying those things like just messing around. He uses other words, but I don't know what I'm allowed to say on here yet or not, so I'm trying to tiptoe around it. I mean, he probably made that particular song to highlight the fact that it's mental illness that causes those actions and not songs, but people constantly blame the media and music. However, it does make someone wonder, right? Okay, the second quote in this article I wanted to share was another one from the same psychologist that I again found so interesting, and I wanted to throw it out there. He said, quote, "Our life is all about imitating and copying. From birth to death, everything is absorbed, and it is just a question of how it is assimilated in the individual." End quote. For some reason, this quote hit me like a ton of bricks, and it stuck with me like, yeah, that's exactly right. We learn from those around us and the experiences around us, and while some experiences are good and some are bad, it really comes down to how these things manifest in us and shape who we are as human beings, right? Wow, it was just simple and profound to me at the same time, and it's one I'm going to hang on to for sure. It also explains patterns within people that we often see here in true crime. Interesting stuff if you delve into the psychology in that. Moving on. The prosecution on the second case, after a judge deemed the first sentence as too lenient, stated, quote, "Mavis slaughtered his victim like a piece of livestock and treated him as an object of his fancy." During this second trial, it was said that the prosecution on the case made what was called a gruesome case, that Armin was guilty of murder and should absolutely never be released. Brandis was said to be, quote, "suffering from a very extreme type of progressive masochism. He wanted to cut off his penis, to amputate it. This idea was his ultimate thrill, that he dreamed of it. He didn't care what happened after, but he wanted to get rid of it." End quote. The criminologist Professor David Wilson on the documentary stated that it was pretty obvious that someone who was wanting to be killed by another is definitely in some way or another dealing with underlying mental health issues. He said that this could be a response to a temporary crisis or it could be long-term. He also mentioned this person could be depressed or struggling with relationships at home or at work. David went on to say that it's obvious that this person is vulnerable and unhealthy at this time. He also feels that these types of chat rooms on the internet is a way for a person to think that they're finding a solution to their issues instead of going to see a psychologist, a doctor, or a psychiatrist. He mentioned that someone could end up agreeing or finding solutions that in a normal circumstance they wouldn't agree to. There was a psychologist on the case who during the trial said that Armin had admitted he still fantasized about consuming flesh of attractive young people, and then in turn could reoffend. The prosecution would then say the fact that he videotaped it proved that Armin killed his victim for his own sexual pleasure. Which, yeah, that's probably true, but I ask you if that really makes a difference in a case that the victim was actively seeking and asking for this. Lots of people videotape their fantasies. In fact, there's a whole industry based on fantasies and fetishes. It's called porn. His lawyer actually admitted that his client did still have a fetish for human flesh, but he did not pose any kind of threat or danger to the public. This is where I'm torn in the thought of that he has only wanted to do this with someone who was willing. Then is he a huge threat to society? He was able to curb his own desires since he was 8 years old, waiting for the perfect person to do this with, again, willingly. Are they now afraid that he has had it and that now it can make him more murderous? And maybe next time the person wouldn't be willing? Because I can understand that. Or are they just freaked out by the fact that Armin wants to eat human flesh? Also, I still find it so mind-boggling what the professor said about how Armin seemed to want to connect to a person in this way of consuming their flesh. It was almost like a bonding experience and really wanting to be bound to someone in this way. I beg the question in my mind, did he do this because he felt abandoned by everyone in his life, leaving him, including the death of his mother? And to him that this was just the ultimate way to bond with someone for them to never leave him? Or was it purely just sexual in nature? Okay, so after having written that little opinion of mine and my thought, I found in my research that Armin actually told the court during his trial that he had felt lonely as well as neglected during his childhood after his father had abandoned his family. Then it went further to say that Armin fantasized about having what was said to be a blonde, quote, younger brother who he would be able to keep forever by, quote, consuming him. Not only is that statement horrifying in the fact that he wanted to eat his own imaginary brother, which is fucked on so many levels, but I think I was onto something about not having to be alone after consuming someone, which is super interesting. The defense, of course, would have the strong argument that Brandes wanted and agreed to be killed and eaten. The quote-unquote video evidence would also play a good hand in the defense's argument because on tape was Brandes apparently giving his clear and full consent. It was also said that after Armin had taken Brandes's life, he actually met up with 5 other men who responded to his internet ad, but he didn't kill any of them. From court records, it is said that Armin actually turned down some of the respondents that came before Brandes because he didn't feel any sexual chemistry with them. Then it went on to say that Armin actually rejected one person in particular because the man wanted to be nailed to the floor and beaten to death. And apparently Armin thought that this particular request was, quote, a bit weird. Armin's defense team went on to say that Armin was guilty at most of, quote-unquote, killing on demand, which is that law that I was telling you guys about before that did come up in the research, that it was used as a part of the defense, which, yeah, I agree. If they already have that law in place, then why is this any different? It was said that during the court trial, he was polite and nice and didn't show any feelings of negativity because he still didn't feel like he had done anything wrong. He felt that what he had done for Brandes was to have given him a nice death. It was said that during the trial, Armin was said to have smiled often or gave a chuckle, and the fact that people in the courtroom were able to see his teeth that had eaten a human freaked people out, which I can completely understand. Armin was also said during a pre-trial interview that after eating Brandes, he was feeling much better and apparently more stable. He then furthered that by saying that Brandes spoke very good English, and since eating him that he felt his own English had improved. Not sure about that one, but okay. The court in Frankfurt said to have commented that while Armin was psychologically ill, he was well aware of his actions. The judge would in fact reject the argument from the defense that what Armin did was similar to a euthanasia. However, it would come down to the video and how a doctor could see that Brandes was still breathing on the video when Armin would start to, trigger warning, cut Brandes's throat. It was said that not only was he breathing, but that he actually moved his head, and this is when Armin would cut his throat and Brandes would stop moving. This would help to prove that Brandes was still alive up until this point, kind of dismissing Armin's account that he died as a result of a mutually wanted sex act. However, Armin repeatedly denied over and over again that Brandes was alive when he started the slaughter. Armin stated in the trial that he thought that Brandes was dead, which on the documentary begged the question of, if you thought someone was dead, then why would you slit his throat? This is why the belief was that Armin knew he was not dead, so he killed him. It was stated many times that Armin did not agree to do this with Brandes because he was also interested in the castration part, but he agreed to the castration part because that's what Brandes wanted. It seemed as though Armin was only interested in eating the meat that would be provided by Brandes, which, okay, that makes sense. If you are wanting the end game to be to consume human flesh, but the other person is agreeable, but also wants to do his fantasy first of the castration, and of course we know that they both ended up getting what they wanted, then it makes sense to me that in this way they could both fulfill their own fantasies. Armin would go on to be found guilty of murder and then was sentenced to life in prison in 2006. In a statement by Armin, he said during one of the trials, quote, "If I hadn't been so stupid as to keep looking on the internet, I would have taken my secret to the grave." I found in a recent article of the Times back in May of 2020 about this case that Armin is being allowed out of prison for what was said to be several brief and, of course, supervised little trips. What? Is that a thing in Germany? I need to know. So it was said that Armin is given sunglasses and a hat to help protect his identity. And of course, there are 2 police officers that always accompany him. One police investigator said, quote, "For security reasons, we take him to another federal state. There, he is allowed to walk through the town." End quote. What? This is blowing my mind. Germany, what is happening over there? You gotta fill me in. Is this normal? Has anyone ever spotted a criminal on the streets before? Oh my God, what would it feel like to be minding your own business and then looking over and recognizing Armin? I don't know how I would feel. So in the article, it also said that Armin was rejected for probation back in 2017, but that the Kassel Regional Court has been considering the second application. It was said in January of that year, the state prosecution was urging the court to deny the parole, quote, due to the lack of a favorable social prognosis. Parole officers have commented that they don't believe that Armin has demonstrated awareness that anything he did was considered wrong. However, Armin's lawyer, Harold Emil, said that Armin has been a model prisoner, saying that he is polite, friendly, and outgoing. The officials within the prison have also said that they feel like if they were to leave his door open, hypothetically, all day, that Armin wouldn't do anything. They have said that Armin is manageable and one of the few prisoners that they have had no issues with. Armin spends his time in prison working in the laundry, reading, going to church, and he even helps other prisoners. His longtime friend, Manfred, says when he was asked about how he feels now that everything has happened, he said that he reads things as they come out about him, but that he doesn't get worked up about him at all. He says that if he were to get out and wants to move back into his hometown down the street and renovate it and live there, then so be it. Manfred says there's no reason for him to be scared of Armin at all and that he doesn't need to be afraid. And that, my friends, are 2 similar cases out of Germany about 2 very different cannibals. One seemed to act of malicious ways, killing his victim without his knowledge or consent to have his genitals eaten. And one seemed to be less malicious and more of a gentle cannibal, if that's even a thing. I don't know. What a weird and twisted journey. As I was researching these cases, another one popped up and I took a quick look at it. And it was just one in 2015 about another cannibal from Germany who was actually a police officer. And him saying that his Polish-born victim had fantasized about being eaten. Except in that case, there was no evidence to support this. So what is with these fetishes and fantasies? Am I the only one who didn't realize that this was so huge? And Germany, why is there so many cannibals running around out there? Consider me fully immersed in fascination when it comes to these cannibals, especially Armin. Like, what is behind that pathology to feel closer to a human being by consuming their flesh? Is anyone else finding themselves super thankful for only craving things like hamburgers or chicken nuggets or pickles? 'Cause I am. I hope you guys will let me know your thoughts on this week's episode either way. Our email is thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com, or you can follow our Facebook page, The Kill File, where I upload posts about the weekly episodes. And that's a good place for some thoughts as well. Do you think Armin should have received life in prison? Or do you think this isn't your typical murder case? Let me know. I hope you guys come on back next Monday as we delve into another true crime case here on The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye! Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop, either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on the Kill File's socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how the Kill File got started, and you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There is contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on the Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.